This crank set is a piece of junk. It's kind of wobbling around and you can't adjust them properly as they start bending out of shape. You can see how the bolt is actually not centered on the crank. So it looks like what they did is they molded plastic around a really skinny, cheap steel crank arm to kind of make it look like a real crank arm. The bottom bracket's in pretty bad shape. Very gritty, very sticky. Well, this non-drive side was incredibly difficult to get off. I had to use a long breaker bar, and you can see that the cage bearings were actually, the cage and everything was kind of falling apart and making cracking sounds. This side is very difficult as well, so I've secured it with a bolt so I can put some more force on it without having these Shimano type splines constantly falling out. Yeah, now as I'm loosening the drive side, you can really see this caged bearing system falling apart on the non-drive side here. Kind of wiggle it around. The bearings are just, they're in there loose somewhere. You can see this bottom bracket is an absolute mess. There's some kind of like rust colored paste all over it. This bike was left sitting outside in the rain and everything for a long time. The new bottom bracket came in. It's called Bucklos. You probably heard of them on eBay or someplace. It looks like it's a better bottom bracket than the one that was in there. It actually has a cartridge bearing on each side. Seems to work smoothly. I'm greasing up the threads here. Get the spindle all greased up. Got the bolts all greased up, and I have Cycling Products International crank set. Got the cranks installed and tightened down. The bike's shifting well. Got more clearance than before now that I'm using a 174 millimeter spindle. This is a 120 millimeter shell. There's a little bit of a wiggle in the bearings on the rear wheel. I'm gonna have to address that. There's the bearings. It looks like there's actually grease in them instead of just a thin oil, like what some of the department store bike makers like to use. So I'll just leave them alone. The cone doesn't look bad. I'll just tighten that back down. I want to see if I can run this 8-speed freewheel on the bike. It looks like there is plenty of clearance, so I'll go ahead and install the other shifters, and I'll have to use a different derailleur because this is a Shimano and my shifters are for the SRAM 1-to-1 ratio. got it in the second cog setting, but it keeps jumping to the first gear. The problems seem to start once I shift into the third cog. Even when I'm in the lowest chain ring. I figured out what the real problem was. My trailer hitch was pressing too hard against this line and actually affecting the derailleur for the shifting. So I had to make a longer cable housing line to prevent that problem. The axle on this bike is so long, I was able to put the trailer hitch just right over top of the nuts instead of replacing the nuts with the hitch. If I were to get rid of those nuts and push this in farther, the trailer would actually hit, it would interfere with this line. That's a problem with the SRAM style of derailleur. If you want to use one of these trailers, is there can be an interference with that line. I think the reason the chain came off this gear is because this derailleur is too high, so I'll have to change that. And you can see there how much I lowered it from the marks on the paint. Well, it looks like the bike is working excellently. I have a lot of problems with this fork bottoming out. I've been hearing a lot of creaking in the front end. Yeah, see, here's the thing you can see. There's a lot of play in that stanchion there. You can see the seal. Now it's kind of got some space in there at times.